The morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching dust motes suspended in the air like frozen stars. Elijah Thorne stood behind a podium he never imagined touching, wearing a suit he'd purchased with money that still felt unreal. The Zora Eleanor Memorial Automotive Training Center stretched behind him, 25,000 square feet of possibility carved from a neighborhood that had forgotten what possibility looked like. 200 faces watched him, cameras perched on tripods. A reporter from the Los Angeles Times adjusted her recorder. The mayor's assistant checked her phone every 30 seconds, already planning the exit. Beside Eli, fingers gripped the podium's edge. Zora Thorne, 10 years old now, all her baby teeth replaced by permanent ones, her smile still capable of cracking glaciers, despite losing the gap that had defined her early childhood. Her hair was pulled into careful braids that had taken Eli 40 minutes this morning. His large hands more practiced now than 3 years ago, though she still giggled at his concentration. The Ferrari 488 GTB gleamed under halogen spotlights in the center of the lobby. $350,000 of Italian engineering, now mounted on a custom platform with a bronze plaque that read, "The car that changed everything." Eli's throat tightened. The words he'd rehearsed evaporated. 3 years ago I was invisible. Today 30 students will never be. Applause erupted. Zora squeezed his hand. The cameras flashed, and for one suspended moment, Elijah Thorne allowed himself to believe this was real, that a man who'd spent 6 months mopping floors could stand here, that justice sometimes arrived, that the truth didn't always lose. Then the memory hit him like a punch. The showroom, the heels clicking on marble. Diana Whitmore's smile sharp enough to draw blood. The scene dissolved. 3 years and 2 months earlier, the alarm screamed at 5:30 in the morning, the same way it had screamed every morning for 6 months. Eli's hand shot out muscle memory, silencing the shriek before it could wake Zora. The studio apartment in Santa Ana held its breath, 400 square feet of carefully managed survival where every item had its place because there was no room for chaos. Zora's corner bed sat against the far wall, surrounded by a fortress of stuffed animals she'd arranged in precise defensive formations. 7 years old, gap-toothed brilliant. Her science fair project, a papier-mâché volcano that was supposed to erupt last week, but still sat half-finished, occupied the card table near the kitchenette. The bills on the refrigerator had migrated from white envelopes to pink ones past due notices that Eli tried to arrange, so the most urgent ones sat on top a triage system for poverty. The bank account on his phone showed $47.32. Rent was $950. It was due in 3 days. January 2026. The date would matter later, become a marker of before and after the hinge on which his entire life would pivot. Eli moved through the morning routine with the efficiency of a man who'd learned that wasted motion was wasted time. Cereal in 2 bowls, milk from a carton that would be empty after today. The spoon scraping the bottom of the sugar container because Zora liked sweetness, and he couldn't afford the luxury of denying her small joys. She stirred as the first light crept through the window. Her eyes opened her mother's eyes, honey brown with flecks of gold that caught the sun. "When are you coming home, Daddy?" The question landed the same way it landed every morning, a reminder that 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. meant 12 hours where she measured time in Mrs. Calloway's kindness, and the hope that today wouldn't be the day the elderly neighbor decided babysitting for free was too much to ask. Eli knelt beside her bed. "Soon, baby, I promise." But promises cost nothing, and Zora was learning to count the hours. On the nightstand between their beds, a photograph watched over them both. Naomi Thorne in her Boeing badge photo taken 6 months before the diagnosis, 2 years before the funeral. She'd been 28 when cancer decided she didn't get to be 29. Elijah had been 31, and Zora had been 3, too young to understand why Mommy stopped coming home. "Naomi taught me to listen to machines before cancer took her voice." The thought was a ritual, now the same sentence every morning, the same way some people prayed. Eli didn't pray anymore. He listened instead to engines, to frequencies, to the truth that hummed beneath surfaces people ignored. The bus to Newport Beach took 40 minutes. Eli watched the neighborhoods change through scratched windows, the transition from survival to prosperity, marked by the gradual disappearance of security bars on windows, the emergence of landscaping that cost more than his monthly rent. Other passengers dozed or scrolled through phones they could afford to replace. A woman across the aisle wore scrubs returning from a night shift at Hoag Hospital. Her eyes held the same exhaustion Eli saw in his own reflection. Prestige Motors. Elite sat on Pacific Coast Highway like a temple to wealth. The showroom windows stretched 30 feet high, showcasing Ferraris and Lamborghinis and Porsches arranged like art installations. The building's white exterior gleamed in the early light, unmarred by the salt air that corroded everything else this close to the ocean. Eli entered through the service entrance in back the door that employees used, the door that kept them separate from the world inside. The basement locker room smelled of industrial cleaner and old sweat. His uniform hung on hooks, 17 gray coveralls with Prestige Motors Elite embroidered on the back, a costume for invisibility. But before he changed, Eli opened his locker. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom he'd constructed from sheet metal and magnetic strips, lived $4,200 of diagnostic equipment. The infrared thermometer had cost 803 weeks of salary, the digital stethoscope $400, the vibration analyzer $350, the diagnostic tablet with custom software he'd coded himself based on Naomi's Boeing engineering notebooks $2,000. He'd saved for 3 years, eaten ramen 4 nights a week, slept in his car on weekends when rent was due to keep Zora fed. Every dollar that didn't go to survival went into equipment that would let him hear what others couldn't. The hospital bed. Naomi's voice weakened by chemotherapy, but still precise, still teaching. Listen, Eli. 847 hertz means thermal stress. The harmonic signature tells you exactly where the failure is propagating. Machines don't lie, baby. People do. She'd been a mechanical engineer at Boeing, designing aircraft systems that kept people alive at 40,000 feet. She'd taught him to see metal and composite materials as living things with languages of their own. When the cancer metastasized to her brain, she'd spent her final coherent weeks transferring 15 years of expertise into notebooks she'd known he would need. The equipment slid into a false bottom in his cleaning cart. No one looked at the janitor's supplies. No one wondered why the detail specialist kept such expensive tools hidden. Invisibility had advantages. For 6 months, Eli had been invisible. He'd mopped the showroom floors while sales associates ignored him. He'd emptied trash cans while executives walked past as if he were furniture. He'd cleaned the bathrooms while mechanics joked about football games, their voices never lowering, because why would they? He was just the cleaning guy, and cleaning guys didn't matter enough to warrant discretion, but invisibility gave him access. He'd watched Diana Whitmore's Ferrari 488 GTB arrive 5 months ago, a personal vehicle she kept in the showroom as advertising. He'd watched it stall the first time 3 weeks later. He'd listened to her rage at the mechanics had seen the first specialist arrive with his diagnostic computer, had observed the confusion when the machine reported no errors. Specialist 2 had replaced the fuel injectors. Specialist 3 had adjusted the timing. Specialist 4 had replaced the engine control unit. Specialist 5 had thrown up his hands and suggested Diana accept that Italian engineering was temperamental. Eli had known the problem within 20 minutes of first listening. Aluminum mounting bracket. Intake manifold section. Thermal stress fractures creating harmonic resonance at 847 hertz when the engine reached specific RPM and temperature combinations. The resonance disrupted the intake seal, caused irregular air-fuel mixture, triggered stalls the computer couldn't predict because the failure was mechanical, not electronic. He'd written a diagnostic report. 3 pages of analysis, thermal imaging data, acoustic frequency measurements, a complete repair procedure. He'd sent it to Diana's email 3 weeks ago, copying the service manager and Richard Whitmore. The read receipt confirmed Diana had opened it at 8:47 in the morning, January 4th. She'd never responded. The showroom opened at 9. Eli was already on his third pass with the floor buffer when the first clients arrived, a couple in their 60s examining a Lamborghini Huracan, their voices hushed with the reverence reserved for churches and places where money spoke louder than prayer. Benjamin Cole nodded to him from across the showroom. Ben was 29, a service coordinator who'd started the same week as Eli, one of the few employees who acknowledged his existence with more than a grunt. White, college-educated from a family that had given him a car for his 16th birthday, everything Eli wasn't. But there was something in Ben's eyes that suggested he saw more than he admitted, noticed things others missed. 10 a.m. brought the morning rush. Sales associates in tailored suits guided clients between vehicles. The sound system played jazz at precisely calibrated volume, loud enough to suggest sophistication, quiet enough to allow conversation. The air conditioning maintained exactly 72 degrees, the temperature of comfort that wealth could buy. Diana Whitmore arrived at 10:30. She moved through the showroom like a woman who owned it, which she technically did, though everyone knew Richard Whitmore held the real power. 42 years old, blonde hair styled in a way that cost more than Eli's monthly grocery budget, wearing a pantsuit that probably exceeded his annual salary. Her heels clicked on the marble Eli had buffed to mirror brightness, each step a metronome of confidence. She never looked at him. Not once in 6 months had Diana Whitmore made eye contact with the man who cleaned her floors. But today was different. Today, the spring collection showcase would change everything, though neither of them knew it yet. The preparations began at 11. The events team erected a small stage near the Ferrari display. Caterers arrived with champagne and hors d'oeuvres that cost more per plate than Eli earned per hour. 50 chairs arranged in precise rows, a sound system tested and retested until the acoustics satisfied Diana's perfectionist standards. The invitation list read like a directory of Southern California wealth: investment bankers, real estate developers, entertainment industry executives, people who bought exotic cars the way others bought groceries, a transaction of casual enormity that meant nothing and everything. Eli retreated to the margins, cleaning windows that didn't need cleaning, his presence expected and ignored. 1 p.m. brought the guests. They arrived in vehicles that cost more than houses in the neighborhoods where Eli had grown up. Ferraris driven to a Ferrari dealership, a redundancy of wealth. The valet parking attendants, all young, all male, all white, shuttled cars to the overflow lot with practiced efficiency. Margaret Ashford arrived in a Rolls-Royce Phantom, driven by a chauffeur who looked bored with luxury. She was 58, white, dressed in understated elegance that somehow cost more than the obvious displays around her. Eli had researched her after Ben mentioned she was considering a significant purchase, 15 exotic cars in her collection, $200 million in net worth. A reputation for walking away from deals the moment she sensed dishonesty. She scanned the showroom with eyes that missed nothing. Diana took the stage at 1:15. The crowd settled into their chairs, champagne flutes in hand, ready to be entertained. This was theater as much as sales, a performance where Diana played the role of expertise, of automotive passion, of everything the wealthy clients wanted to believe about themselves. This season brings extraordinary opportunities. Her voice carried perfectly, the sound system transforming her words into gospel. We've curated vehicles that represent the pinnacle of engineering excellence. Each car has a story. Each represents a legacy. The crowd murmured appreciation. But there's one vehicle I want to discuss personally. Diana gestured toward her Ferrari 488 GTB. This beauty has been temperamental. Laughter rippled through the audience. Mechanical issues were charming when you could afford 5 specialists. 5 certified Ferrari technicians have examined this car. Each brought decades of experience. Each brought diagnostic equipment worth more than most vehicles on the road. Diana paused for effect. And each, I'm afraid, has failed to solve the mystery. Eli continued wiping a window that had been clean for 10 minutes. His back was to the stage, but he could see Diana's reflection in the glass. Perhaps we need fresh perspective. Her tone shifted, acquiring an edge that made Eli's shoulders tense. Our detail specialist spends so much time observing. Maybe he has creative theories. The showroom went quiet. Eli turned slowly. Diana's eyes locked on him. 50 pairs of guest eyes followed her gaze. Cameras that had been recording the presentation swiveled to capture the janitor with the cleaning rag. Mr. Thorne has been with us for 6 months. Diana's smile could cut diamonds. Always watching. Always listening. Perhaps his unique vantage point has revealed insights our certified specialists missed. The coded language was perfect. Nothing overtly racist, nothing legally actionable. Just the subtle suggestion that the black man cleaning floors might have delusions of expertise, might think his observations mattered, might not understand his place. Diana walked to a small table beside the Ferrari. She picked up the key fob, held it up for the crowd to see. If anyone here can fix what 5 experts couldn't, this car is theirs. Her voice rang with theatrical generosity. I'm a woman of my word. She placed the keys on the table with deliberate precision. The crowd watched. Cameras recorded. 50 witnesses to Diana Whitmore's public promise. Eli stood motionless. The cleaning rag hung from his hand. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to retreat to invisibility, to understand that this was a trap designed to humiliate him in front of people who would share the story at dinner parties for months. But then he thought of Zora. He thought of Naomi. He thought of the diagnostic report Diana had read and ignored. The rag dropped into his cleaning cart. He walked toward the stage, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The crowd parted. Diana's smile widened, anticipating his surrender, his apology, his admission that he'd overstepped. Eli stopped 3 feet from her. I don't have theories, Mrs. Whitmore. The words came out calm, measured a man stating facts rather than opinions. I have answers. The silence deepened. Diana's smile flickered. For just a moment, something moved behind her eyes, surprise, calculation. Fear. Then the performance mask returned. How delightful. Her voice dripped with condescension. Then you have 1 hour. If you can fix what 5 certified specialists couldn't, the car is yours. She leaned closer, voice dropping to a stage whisper that carried to the front rows. But when you fail, Mr. Thorne, I'll expect your resignation on my desk by end of business today. The trap had closed. What Diana didn't know. What she couldn't know, because she'd never bothered to see him as anything more than hired help, was that Eli had already diagnosed the problem. He'd written the solution. He'd sent her the answer 3 weeks ago. She'd read it. She'd ignored it. And now she expected him to fail publicly to prove that expertise came from credentials and expensive training, not from a black man who learned from his dying wife's engineering notebooks. Eli walked to his car in the parking lot. The 1998 Honda Accord had 200,000 miles and a transmission that threatened failure every morning. But the trunk held his real diagnostic equipment, the tools he couldn't risk leaving in the dealership, the instruments he'd spent 3 years acquiring. He returned carrying a professional-grade diagnostic bag that cost more than his car. The crowd murmured. Cameras zoomed in. Diana's eyebrows rose fractionally. Margaret Ashford leaned forward in her chair. Eli approached the Ferrari with the careful deliberation of a surgeon approaching an operating table. The engine bay was already open. Diana had left it exposed as evidence of the mystery. He pulled out the digital stethoscope. Someone in the crowd laughed. A woman whispered to her companion. Is he seriously going to listen to it? Eli placed the stethoscope against specific points on the engine block. He closed his eyes. The world narrowed to sound, to frequencies most people couldn't distinguish, to harmonics that told stories about metal under stress. There. The resonance signature. 847 Hz with a secondary harmonic at 1239.8. The exact frequencies Naomi had taught him meant thermal stress fracture in aluminum alloys. He opened his eyes. The crowd watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. Diana stood with arms crossed, confident in his impending failure. 847 Hz. Eli spoke clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. Secondary harmonic at 1239.8 Hz. A man in the front row turned to his wife. What does that mean? It means I know exactly what's broken. The crowd stirred. This wasn't the script Diana had written. The janitor was supposed to fumble to admit ignorance, to provide entertainment through humiliation. Margaret Ashford stood. "Excuse me?" Her voice carried authority that had nothing to do with volume. "I'd like to make a phone call." Diana's smile tightened. "Of course, Mrs. Ashford. Though I'm not sure." Margaret was already dialing. Within 30 seconds, she was speaking. "Sarah, it's Margaret. I need you at Prestige Motors immediately." "Yes, I'm serious. There's a diagnostic challenge you need to witness." She ended the call and looked at Diana. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell from UCLA will be joining us. She's a Ferrari consultant for their North American technical team. I'm sure you won't mind her professional opinion on Mr. Thorne's analysis." Diana's face went pale beneath her makeup. The trap she'd designed was suddenly showing teeth she hadn't anticipated. Eli returned to his examination. He pulled out the infrared thermometer, $800 of German engineering, capable of measuring temperature variations to 1/10 of a degree. The crowd watched as he methodically mapped the engine bay's thermal profile, his hands moving with the confidence of expertise. 20 minutes later, Dr. Sarah Mitchell arrived. She was 52, white, dressed in jeans and a UCLA faculty polo that suggested she'd been pulled from weekend plans. She carried her own diagnostic equipment, professional-grade instruments that matched Eli's in quality, if not in origin. Margaret made introductions. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Elijah Thorne. He's diagnosed a resonance failure at 847 Hz. Sarah's eyebrows rose. "That's a very specific frequency." She turned to Eli. "How did you measure that without spectrum analysis equipment?" "I have spectrum analysis." He pulled out his tablet, showed her the custom software. "And I have ears." Sarah examined his equipment with the careful attention of someone who recognized quality. "These are professional-grade tools. Where did you receive your training?" "My wife was a mechanical engineer at Boeing. She taught me before cancer took her." The showroom had gone silent. Diana watched from the stage, her performance mask slipping to reveal something harder, more desperate. Sarah pulled out her own infrared thermometer. "May I verify your thermal readings?" "Please." She spent 10 minutes confirming every measurement Eli had taken. When she finished, her expression had shifted from skepticism to professional respect. "Your thermal mapping is accurate to 0.2 degrees. She spoke to the crowd now, her voice carrying the authority of academic expertise. That level of precision is rare even among certified specialists. Eli pointed to a specific location near the intake manifold. "The problem is here. Aluminum mounting bracket thermal stress fractures. When the engine reaches specific RPM and temperature combinations, the bracket vibrates at resonant frequency, creates harmonic interference that disrupts the intake seal." Sarah leaned in, examining the bracket with a jeweler's loop she'd pulled from her kit. After a long moment, she straightened. "He's right." She held up the loop. "Microfractures radiating from the bolt holes. Classic thermal stress pattern." The crowd erupted in murmurs. Cameras captured Diana's expression, shock giving way to panic, giving way to rage. But Eli wasn't finished. "This is the same diagnosis I sent Mrs. Whitmore 3 weeks ago." He pulled out his phone, navigated to his sent emails, turned the screen toward Sarah. "Complete analysis, thermal imaging data repair procedure. Sent January 4th at 6 a.m. Sarah read the email. Her expression darkened. She turned to Diana. "You've had the solution for 3 weeks." Diana opened her mouth, closed it. The performance had no script for this moment. Ben Cole appeared at the edge of the crowd. His face was pale, but his jaw was set. He carried a folder HR documents he'd copied in secret evidence he'd been collecting for months. He caught Eli's eye, nodded once. The trap Diana had designed was closing on her instead. But before Eli could process what that meant, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. Mrs. Calloway's number. He answered, stepping away from the crowd. "Mr. Thorne." "I'm so sorry to bother you." Mrs. Calloway's voice carried distress she tried to hide. "There's been an incident at Zora's school. They're asking you to come immediately." Eli's chest tightened. "Is she hurt?" No. But there's been an accusation about lying. The principal wants to see you right away." He looked at the Ferrari, at the crowd, at Diana, whose trap was unraveling, but whose power remained. "Tell them I'm on my way." He ended the call. The showroom watched him, waiting for his next move. Margaret Ashford stood. "Mr. Thorne, is everything all right?" "My daughter needs me." He looked at Diana. 1 hour, you said. I'll be back in 45 minutes to finish this. Diana's smile was vicious. If you leave now, you forfeit. The car remains mine and your employment ends today. Eli thought of Zora, 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, believing her father when he said machines don't lie, that truth matters, that promises kept are worth more than promises broken. He thought of Naomi's voice. The truth is bigger than fear, Eli. Always. He met Diana's eyes. 45 minutes. When I return, I'll fix your car, and then you'll honor your word in front of 50 witnesses and a dozen cameras. He walked out. Behind him, the crowd exploded into conversation. Margaret Ashford pulled out her phone again. Dr. Sarah Mitchell examined the Ferrari with renewed interest. Ben Cole clutched his folder of evidence. And Diana Whitmore realized, perhaps for the first time, that the trap she'd designed had teeth she couldn't control and they were closing on her throat. Riverview Elementary School sat in a neighborhood that had gentrified over the past decade, pricing out the families who'd built the community and replacing them with professionals who complained about property taxes while voting down school funding measures. The building was 60 years old, renovated with the minimum investment required to appear modern without actually addressing systemic issues. Eli arrived in 20 minutes, his Honda protesting every acceleration. The front office smelled of industrial cleaner and old paper. The receptionist, white 50s wearing a cardigan despite the California heat, looked up from her computer with the expression of someone interrupting a task she found more important than human interaction. I'm here for Zora Thorne. The receptionist checked her screen. Principal is waiting. Office 3. Principal Catherine Morrison sat behind a desk that tried to project authority through size alone. She was in her 50s, white, with the kind of smile that had been focus grouped to appear warm without actually conveying warmth. Across from her, in a child-sized chair that made Eli's chest ache, Zora sat with her hands folded in her lap. Her gap-toothed smile was absent. Mr. Thorne. Principal Morrison gestured to the adult-sized chair beside Zora. Thank you for coming on short notice. Eli sat. His hand found Zora's squeezed gently. She squeezed back. We've had a situation today. The principal folded her hands on the desk, mirroring professionalism she'd learned in administrator training. Zora told several classmates that her father owns a Ferrari. Eli waited. One of the parents contacted me. She was concerned that Zora was, let's say, embellishing her family's circumstances. The principal's eyes flicked to Eli's work coveralls still stained from the morning's cleaning duties. Children sometimes tell stories to feel included, and we want to address this gently, but truthfulness is a core value we instill here at Riverview. My daughter doesn't lie. The words came out flat, controlled, but beneath the surface rage built like pressure in a sealed container. Mr. Thorne, I understand defending your child, but given your employment circumstances, he cut her off. Given my employment circumstances, you've made assumptions about what I can and cannot own. You've decided my daughter is lying because a black man who works as a janitor couldn't possibly afford a luxury vehicle. Principal Morrison's face flushed. I never said anything about race. You didn't have to. The silence stretched. Zora's hand tightened in his. For the record, Eli continued, his voice deadly. Calm. My wife was a mechanical engineer at Boeing. She taught me diagnostic expertise worth more than your annual salary. I've been offered that Ferrari by the CEO of Prestige Motors Elite in front of 50 witnesses, and when I return therein, he checked his phone 22 minutes. I'm going to fix a problem 5 certified specialists couldn't solve, and I'm going to drive that car off the lot. He stood, pulling Zora up with him. My daughter told the truth. Your parent complained because the truth made them uncomfortable, and you called me here because you'd rather police a 7-year-old's honesty than confront the assumptions that made you believe she was lying. Principal Morrison's mouth opened closed. Eli looked down at Zora. You did nothing wrong, baby, nothing. Outside, walking to the car, Zora's voice was small. Daddy, are you really going to fix the car? Yes. Are you really going to own it? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. They think I'm lying because you're black. It wasn't a question. Eli knelt on the sidewalk, bringing himself to her eye level. Some people can't see past what they expect. They look at me and see a janitor, so they decide that's all I can be. They don't see the hours I studied. They don't see Mom teaching me. They don't see the truth. He touched her cheek. But machines don't lie, remember, and neither do we. So when we tell the truth and people don't believe us, that's their failure, not ours. Zora nodded slowly. The gap-toothed smile tried to return hesitant but present. Can I watch you fix the car? Eli checked the time. 17 minutes to get back to Prestige Motors. 45-minute deadline. The whole structure of the afternoon balanced on a knife's edge. We'll see what Mrs. Whitmore says. But either way, you're going to see your dad keep a promise. They drove back in silence, Zora watching the neighborhoods change through the window, learning lessons about America that Eli wished she didn't need to know at 7 years old. Prestige Motors' elite had transformed in his absence. News vans crowded the parking lot. Someone had leaked the story. Probably Ben, definitely intentionally. KTLA, Fox 11. Even a CNN affiliate, their satellite trucks bristling with equipment. The showroom crowd had doubled spectators drawn by the scent of spectacle. Eli parked in the employee lot. He turned to Zora. You stay in the car, lock the doors. If anyone approaches who's not me, you call Mrs. Calloway. Zora nodded, but her eyes were wide. The Ferrari sat visible through the showroom windows gleaming under lights. Eli walked through the service entrance. The basement locker room was empty. He pulled out the replacement bracket he'd purchased 2 weeks ago. Ferrari part number 298847, $47 from a specialty supplier in Los Angeles. The part sat in his locker waiting for this moment he hadn't known would arrive. When he emerged into the showroom, cameras swiveled to capture him. The crowd parted. Diana stood near the Ferrari, flanked by 2 lawyers Eli didn't recognize. Richard Whitmore had materialized from his office, watching from the second-floor balcony with an expression that revealed nothing. Eli checked his phone. 44 minutes since he'd left. 1 minute to spare. Diana's voice cut through the murmurs. Mr. Thorne, how gracious of you to return. I said 45 minutes. Here I am. He walked to the Ferrari. The crowd pressed closer. Margaret Ashford had moved to the front row, her phone recording everything. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood beside her, professional interest overriding whatever plans she'd abandoned. Ben Cole appeared at Eli's elbow, his voice low. Marcus DeLuca is here. Specialist number 3. He's ready to talk. Eli glanced across the showroom. A man in his 50s, white, with Italian features, wearing the haunted expression of someone who'd traded integrity for money and found the price too high, stood near the entrance. The pieces were assembling. Eli pulled out the replacement bracket, held it up for the crowd to see. This is Ferrari part number 298847, aluminum mounting bracket for the intake manifold. Cost $47. He turned to Diana. The 5 specialists you hired, they all identified symptoms. None identified cause, because the cause is invisible unless you know exactly what temperature to examine it at. He pulled out his infrared thermometer. This bracket needs to be installed at exactly 73 degrees Celsius. Not 72, not 74. At 73 degrees, the thermal expansion coefficient of this aluminum alloy matches the cast iron mounting surface perfectly. Dr. Sarah Mitchell nodded slowly. That's aerospace-level precision. Where did you learn thermal expansion coefficients for Ferrari-specific alloys? My wife designed aircraft systems at Boeing. When you're building planes that fly at 40,000 feet, you learn that temperature variance of 1 degree can mean the difference between landing safely and falling from the sky. The crowd was silent. Diana's lawyers whispered urgently in her ear. Eli continued. Specialist number 3 installed this bracket at room temperature. Thermal misalignment created new stress points. The bracket failed again within 10 days. That's why your $5,000 repair lasted less than 2 weeks. He turned to Marcus DeLuca. Isn't that right, Mr. DeLuca? Marcus stepped forward. His voice shook, but his words were clear. Mrs. Whitmore paid me $10,000 to write a false diagnostic report. She knew the bracket was the problem. She knew Mr. Thorne's analysis was correct. She wanted him to fail publicly. He pulled documents from his jacket: wire transfer confirmation, email exchanges, photos of the original fractured bracket. Diana's face drained of color. The lawyers grabbed her arm, whispered furiously. Richard Whitmore descended the stairs, moving with the controlled fury of a man watching his investment collapse. But Eli wasn't finished. He turned to the Ferrari, began the repair with surgical precision. The crowd watched in absolute silence as he removed the damaged bracket, examined the microfractures under magnification, showed them to Dr. Mitchell for confirmation. Then he began the heating process using a portable induction heater to bring the replacement bracket to exactly 73 degrees. The infrared thermometer displayed the temperature in real time on his tablet, projected onto the showroom wall so everyone could verify. 72.8, 73, hold. He installed the bracket with the careful deliberation of a man who understood that precision mattered more than speed. Torque wrench set to exactly 22 foot-pounds, diagonal pattern to distribute stress evenly. The installation took 12 minutes. When he finished, he stepped back. The engine bay gleamed under the showroom lights, the new bracket invisible among the mechanical complexity. Now we test. He climbed into the driver's seat. The interior smelled of leather and wealth, a world he'd observed but never inhabited. His hands touched the steering wheel, carbon fiber, hand-stitched, worth more than his car. The engine started on the first turn of the key. Not just running, singing. A pure, clean note that made several people in the crowd close their eyes in appreciation. Eli revved the engine once, twice, 3 times. Each time the response was immediate, smooth, flawless. He brought it to 3,200 RPM, held it there. Let the temperature climb to 92 degrees Celsius, the exact conditions that had triggered previous stalls. The engine purred. Dr. Sarah Mitchell pulled out her own diagnostic equipment, verified the acoustic signature. No harmonic resonance, no irregular frequencies, better than factory specification. She looked at the crowd. This is the cleanest diagnostic and repair work I've seen in 25 years of automotive engineering. Applause erupted. Cameras captured Diana's expression. Shock bleeding into desperation. Bleeding into rage. Richard Whitmore pushed through the crowd, grabbed Diana's arm, pulled her toward his office. Margaret Ashford stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore made a promise in front of 50 witnesses. That promise was recorded by multiple cameras. The car belongs to Mr. Thorne. Diana jerked her arm from Richard's grasp. This is fraud. Conspiracy. He stole proprietary. Eli's voice cut through her panic. I diagnosed this problem 3 weeks ago. I sent you a detailed report. You read it at 8:47 a.m. on January 4th. You ignored it because accepting my expertise meant admitting that a black man cleaning your floors understood Ferrari engineering better than the specialists you paid $200 per hour. He pulled up the email on his phone, turned the screen toward the cameras. You knew I was right. You set me up to fail, and when I didn't fail, you tried to steal my victory. The showroom erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Guests pulled out phones recording sharing, turning a private humiliation into viral spectacle. Richard Whitmore's voice boomed over the chaos. Everyone out now, this is private property. But Margaret Ashford didn't move. Neither did Dr. Mitchell. Neither did the reporters with cameras. This car belongs to Mr. Thorne. Margaret's voice carried absolute certainty. Your wife promised it in front of witnesses. That constitutes a binding verbal contract under California law. If you attempt to renege, I will personally fund the lawsuit that destroys your reputation. Richard looked at Diana, at Eli, at the cameras recording everything. The calculation happened in real-time lawsuits versus bad publicity versus Margaret Ashford's $2.3 million Lamborghini order that hung in the balance. Fine. The word came out like broken glass. Take the car. He turned and walked away. Diana stood frozen, abandoned by her husband, exposed in front of the clients she'd courted, destroyed by the trap she'd designed. Eli didn't celebrate. He simply nodded to Margaret, to Dr. Mitchell, to Ben Cole, who'd risked his job to help. Then he walked outside to where Zora waited in the Honda, her face pressed against the window. He opened the door. She tumbled out, wrapping small arms around his waist. "Did you fix it, Daddy?" "Yes, baby." "Did you win?" He looked back at the showroom, at the Ferrari that was legally his, at the cameras that had documented everything, at the truth that had finally spoken louder than lies. "We won, but more importantly, we told the truth, and the truth was bigger than the people who tried to bury it." Zora pulled back, her gap-toothed smile blazing. "Bigger than the sky." Eli knelt, bringing himself to her level. "Bigger than the sky, baby." Inside the showroom, Ben Cole was talking to reporters. Marcus DeLuca was handing over documentation to a lawyer Margaret had called. Dr. Mitchell was examining the Ferrari's repair with professional fascination, and Diana Whitmore was making a phone call that Eli couldn't hear, didn't need to hear, because the pattern was revealing itself. This wasn't isolated. This wasn't one CEO's prejudice. This was something deeper, older, more systematic than a single showroom in Newport Beach. The battle was won. The war was just beginning. The termination letter arrived at 6 a.m. the next morning, January 25, 2026, delivered by email because cowards never knocked on doors. Eli read it on his phone while Zora slept, the studio apartment still dark except for the glow of the screen. Due to gross misconduct, unauthorized use of company property, and disruption of client relations, your employment with Prestige Motors Elite is terminated effective immediately. Final paycheck will be mailed within 7 business days as required by California law. Signed by Richard Whitmore, not Diana, the husband cleaning up his wife's mess, protecting assets while sacrificing her reputation. Eli's bank account showed $12.47. The final paycheck would cover 2 weeks at $15 per hour, $450 before taxes, maybe $300 after. Rent was due in 6 days. $950 he didn't have. But the Ferrari title sat on the kitchen counter, transferred, legally documented, by a dozen cameras and 50 witnesses, $350,000 of Italian engineering that he couldn't sell without seeming opportunistic, couldn't keep without appearing tone-deaf, couldn't use without acknowledging that Diana's public promise had been both trap and treasure. His phone buzzed, text from Ben Cole. "Check the news. It's everywhere." Eli opened his browser. The video had 15 million views. CNN had picked it up. The Washington Post ran a think piece about systemic racism in luxury retail. Twitter exploded with hashtags Prestige Motors, racism, invisible expertise, Ferrari justice, and beneath the celebration in comment sections and Reddit threads, people were digging. Former employees sharing stories, customers posting receipts showing price disparities, a pattern emerging from the digital excavation that mirrored what Eli suspected but couldn't yet prove. Another text. This one from an unknown number. "Mr. Thorne, this is Margaret Ashford. We need to talk. Today. My office noon. This is bigger than you know." Zora stirred in her bed. Her eyes opened, found him in the pre-dawn darkness. "You're up early, Daddy." "Couldn't sleep, baby." She sat up, rubbed her eyes with small fists. "Are we rich now?" The question landed like a punch. How to explain to a 7-year-old that wealth was more complicated than ownership that the car represented? Victory and burden in equal measure, that being right didn't pay rent. "We have something valuable, but value isn't the same as money we can spend." Zora processed this with the seriousness she applied to math problems. "Can we still get breakfast?" "Always." Margaret Ashford's office occupied the top floor of a building in Laguna Hills that didn't advertise its purpose. No signage, no directory in the lobby, just a reception desk staffed by a woman who looked capable of ending careers with a phone call. Eli arrived at 11:45, 20 minutes early, because poverty had taught him that lateness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Zora stayed with Mrs. Calloway, the elderly neighbor who'd watched her for free through 6 months of Eli's invisibility, and who'd cried watching the viral video, whispering that Rosa would have been so proud. The receptionist led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Pacific. Margaret sat at a table that could seat 20 alone except for Dr. Sarah Mitchell and a man Eli didn't recognize 50s, black, wearing a suit that cost more than Eli's monthly salary used to be. Margaret stood. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming. This is Dr. Mitchell you remember from yesterday, and this is James Crawford, attorney specializing in employment discrimination and civil rights." Crawford extended his hand. "The video has been viewed by 23 million people as of this morning." My phone hasn't stopped ringing. "3 law firms want to represent you pro bono. The EEOC has opened a preliminary investigation, and you're about to have choices you didn't have 24 hours ago." Eli shook his hand, sat in the chair Margaret indicated. "I need to see what else exists beyond your personal experience." Crawford pulled out a laptop. "What you witnessed yesterday was individual discrimination, but patterns rarely exist in isolation. Do you have evidence of other incidents?" "Ben Cole gave me something." Eli pulled the USB drive from his pocket, set it on the table. "He said it contains HR files, emails, financial records he's been collecting for months." Crawford inserted this drive into his laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes scanning rapidly. After 3 minutes of silence, he looked up. "This is substantial." He turned the screen toward Eli. 4 previous challenges identical to yours. All minorities. All set up to fail. All terminated or forced to quit within months. Margaret leaned forward. Names. Crawford scrolled. Keisha Taylor, 2022. Jerome Washington, 2023. 2 others with redacted names, likely settlement agreements with NDAs. He clicked through more files. But it's not just the challenges. Look at this hiring data. Black and Latino applicants offered an average of $2 per hour less than white applicants with identical qualifications. Customer pricing varies by zip code. Minority neighborhoods charge 12% more for identical services. Dr. Mitchell examined the screen. "That's not individual bias, that's systematic policy." Crawford continued clicking. "And these emails." He highlighted several messages. Diana Whitmore discussing maintaining client comfort and brand alignment. Richard Whitmore approving pricing strategies that explicitly target low oversight demographics. Corporate speak for racism. Margaret's voice was cold. "How many people are we talking about?" Crawford ran calculations, based on employment records and customer data spanning 7 years across this dealership alone. Conservative estimate, 100 employees affected. Maybe 500 customers overcharged. And if the pattern exists at the other 11 Whitmore dealerships, then we're looking at federal scope, RICO implications, Department of Justice involvement rather than just EEOC. Crawford closed the laptop. "Mr. Thorne, you need to understand what you're holding. This isn't just your vindication. This is evidence of organized, coordinated, multi-state discrimination conspiracy." The weight of it settled on Eli's shoulders. Yesterday, he'd wanted justice for himself. Today, they were offering him responsibility for something that could destroy an empire. "What happens if I proceed?" Crawford's expression was grave. "Federal investigations take months. Civil litigation could take years. You'll be deposed, cross-examined, scrutinized. They'll investigate every aspect of your life looking for ammunition. And you'll face retaliation, not always legal, but real. And if I don't, then Diana gets fired. You keep the Ferrari and the system continues operating exactly as it has for 7 years. The video fades. The outrage moves on. And Richard Whitmore hires another CEO who implements the same practices with more sophistication." Eli thought of the school principal's assumption that Zora was lying, of the 100 employees whose stories mirrored his own, of Naomi's voice. Sometimes fixing the immediate problem isn't enough. Sometimes you have to redesign the entire system so the failure mode can't recur. "What do you need from me?" The next 72 hours moved with controlled urgency. Crawford contacted former employees whose names appeared in the files. Keisha Taylor answered on the first ring, her voice shaking. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to do something about this." Jerome Washington was more cautious. "I signed an NDA. They paid me to stay quiet. Crawford's response was precise. If there's a federal investigation, NDAs become void. You can testify without penalty. By January 28th, Crawford had commitments from 6 former employees willing to provide testimony. By the 30th, the number had grown to 12. Each had a story. Each had documentation. Each had been invisible until someone gave them permission to speak. The EEOC investigator assigned to the preliminary review was named Rachel Moreno. She was 43, white, with professional credentials that suggested 20 years perfecting the art of patient documentation. Her first call to Eli came February 1st, 2026. Mr. Thorne, I've reviewed the materials submitted by your attorney. I need to conduct a formal interview. Can you come to our Los Angeles office tomorrow at 9 a.m.? Eli checked his bank account. $8.17. The bus fare to downtown LA would cost $7 round trip. I'll be there. The interview lasted 6 hours. Moreno recorded everything with the mechanical precision of someone who'd documented thousands of cases. She asked about hiring practices, bathroom access, the lunchroom seating that mysteriously segregated by race without any written policy, the small indignities that accumulated into systemic oppression. Did anyone witness the separate bathroom policy? Everyone, but it wasn't written down, just understood. And the Ferrari challenge, you sent a diagnostic report 3 weeks prior. Eli showed her the email, the read receipt, the timestamp showing Diana had opened it at 8:47 a.m. Moreno made notes. This is where your case becomes extraordinary. Most discrimination victims can't demonstrate competence publicly. You proved it in front of 50 witnesses. But it's still my word against Diana's about intent. Moreno smiled slightly about that. She turned her monitor toward Eli. An email filled the screen. Subject line, Problem Resolution Strategy. Sent from Diana's work account to her personal email with Richard Whitmore CC'd. The email detailed the Ferrari challenge in precise terms. Target employee. Expected failure mode. Specialists who'd been contacted to provide cover. Even the phrasing Diana would use to make it seem spontaneous. Dated January 21st, 2026. 2 days before the showcase. She planned everything. Eli's hands trembled, documented it, sent it to her husband for approval. People who commit institutional discrimination often document their coordination meticulously. Moreno's voice was dry. It's one of the paradoxes. The need to coordinate requires communication, and communication creates evidence. How did you get this? Ben Cole provided Diana's email backup before he resigned. She hadn't deleted anything because she assumed no one would look. Moreno closed the file. This email, combined with Marcus DeLuca's wire transfer, combined with the pattern in HR files, gives us probable cause. The question is scope. She looked at Eli directly. Do we investigate just Prestige Motors Elite, or expand to the entire Whitmore Automotive Group? How many victims across all locations? Conservative estimate, based on employment patterns, 127 over 7 years. 127 people. 127 families. 127 stories of talent buried. Investigate all of it. The settlement offer arrived February 5th, hand-delivered by a process server at 10 p.m. because Richard Whitmore's lawyers understood that desperation flourished in darkness. $85,000. Immediate payment. Confidentiality agreement prohibiting any discussion of Prestige Motors. Diana Whitmore or Richard Whitmore. Non-disparagement clause. And a provision requiring Eli to surrender the Ferrari title in exchange for fair market value. Crawford called within minutes. They're trying to buy your silence before the federal investigation gains momentum. If you accept, the EEOC loses its most compelling witness. $85,000 would solve immediate problems. Rent, food, the transmission that finally failed in the Honda last week. How long until I'm broke if I refuse? With the Ferrari as an asset you can't liquidate, 3 months. Maybe 4 if you're extremely careful. And the EEOC investigation, 18 months minimum before findings. Longer before any compensation. So I can have money now or justice eventually, but not both. That's the choice they're giving you. Crawford's voice hardened. But there's a third option. We file civil suits simultaneously with the EEOC complaint. Seek emergency relief to prevent document destruction. Make this expensive enough that settling with you becomes cheaper than fighting. Eli looked at the bills on his refrigerator, reorganizing themselves into new configurations of urgency. File the suit. February 12th brought the first depositions. Richard Whitmore's lawyers had rented a conference room that cost more per hour than Eli used to make in a week. The lead attorney was Patricia Blackwood, 60s white, with professional cruelty, perfected over 40 years of defending corporations. Mr. Thorne. Her voice was pleasant conversational. Thank you for being here. I know this is difficult. Eli sat across from her, Crawford beside him, a camera recording every expression. Let's discuss your employment history before Prestige Motors. You worked various positions. Mechanic's assistant, parts delivery, never as a certified mechanic. I don't mean you have certification. I have expertise. Expertise you claim came from your late wife. Naomi Thorne was a mechanical engineer at Boeing. Yes. And she taught you automotive diagnostics while dying of cancer. She taught me for years before the diagnosis. The cancer didn't stop her being a teacher. It just gave us less time. Blackwood pulled out a document. Boeing has no record of Mrs. Thorne specializing in automotive systems. Her work focused on aircraft hydraulics. Aircraft hydraulics and automotive systems share fundamental principles. Heat transfer, fluid dynamics, material stress analysis. The scale is different, the physics aren't, but you're not an engineer. No. Never attended college. Couldn't afford it. So when you claim expertise, you're really claiming that informal education from a dying woman makes you more qualified than certified specialists with decades of formal training. I'm claiming that I diagnosed a problem 5 specialists missed. The Ferrari runs now. That's not a claim, it's a documented fact verified by Dr. Sarah Mitchell from UCLA. Blackwood shifted tactics. The repair cost $47 in parts. 5 specialists spent $8,000 and failed. Doesn't that seem improbable? Improbable that I succeeded, or improbable that they failed. That a man with no credentials could outperform experts. Only if you assume credentials guarantee competence. Eli leaned forward slightly. Those specialists were looking at computer readouts. I was listening to the machine itself. Computers report what they're programmed to find. Machines tell the truth about their actual condition. Sometimes truth speaks louder than data. The line landed. Crawford's expression flickered with approval. The deposition continued for 4 more hours. Questions about Eli's finances designed to paint him as opportunistic. Questions about his relationship with Ben Cole suggesting conspiracy. Questions about his arrest at 19 for trespassing at a beach party implying criminal tendency. But Eli remained steady, answering precisely, never volunteering information beyond what was asked, letting facts speak because facts didn't require embellishment. When it ended, Crawford walked him to the parking lot where Margaret had loaned him a vehicle. A modest Toyota, nothing ostentatious but reliable transportation that wouldn't strand him. You did well. They didn't get what they wanted. What did they want? An emotional outburst, an inconsistency, something to make you seem unreliable. Crawford unlocked his own car. They got none of it, which means they'll escalate. The escalation came February 15th. News leak to conservative outlets. Luxury dealership worker staged viral video for fame and fortune. Anonymous sources claiming Eli had planned the confrontation deliberately provoked Diana fabricated the diagnostic report after the fact. Social media erupted with bot accounts questioning his expertise. Reddit threads suggesting the Ferrari repair had been simple, that any competent mechanic could have done it, that Dr. Sarah Mitchell had been paid to validate fraud. Margaret called at midnight. They're trying to destroy your credibility before the next round of depositions. If they can't win on facts, they win by making you unreliable. Can they succeed? Depends on what they find. Everyone has something in their past. Eli's credit score was 520 because medical debt from Naomi's cancer had destroyed their finances. His employment history was spotty because no one hired black men without credentials. The arrest at 19, though charges were dismissed, remained on record. None of it was relevant to whether Diana had committed discrimination. All of it would be used to suggest he deserved what happened. Diana Whitmore's deposition was scheduled for February 20th. Eli wasn't allowed to attend, but Crawford received the transcript within hours. She'd aged visibly in the 3 weeks since the showcase. The confidence that had carried her through years of discrimination was gone, replaced by something more desperate, more cornered. The key exchange came during hour 3. Blackwood: Mrs. Whitmore, did you plan the Ferrari challenge in advance? Diana: It was a spontaneous decision during the showcase. Opposing counsel: Then how do you explain this email from January 21st detailing the exact challenge, including which specialists you'd contacted and what phrasing you'd use? Long silence. Diana: Richard told me to send that. He wanted documentation of our client engagement strategies. Opposing counsel: So Richard Whitmore directed you to set up Mr. Thorne to fail. Diana: I was following corporate policy. He approved everything. The challenges, the pricing differences, the hiring practices. It was all him. Crawford called Eli after reading it. She's throwing Richard under the bus, trying to save herself by claiming she was following orders. Will it work? Legally? Maybe. Those emails show Richard's involvement, but morally, she still implemented every policy, still humiliated every employee, still destroyed careers. What happens now? Now Richard deposes, probably claims the opposite, that Diana acted alone, exceeded her authority. Crawford paused. Partners in discrimination become enemies when facing federal charges. Our job is making sure both go down. The eviction notice arrived February 28th, 30 days to vacate. After that, sheriff's deputies would physically remove their possessions and change the locks. Eli sat in the studio apartment staring at the notice while Zora slept. The Ferrari sat in Margaret's climate-controlled garage, too valuable to risk, too symbolic to sell. An asset that couldn't be liquidated because liquidating it meant admitting defeat. His phone buzzed. Text from Crawford. Heard about eviction. Margaret Ashford has offered to cover housing until case resolves. Before you say no, consider that homelessness helps nobody. Pride was expensive. Sometimes accepting help was the only way to keep fighting. Eli typed back. Tell her I'll pay her back when this is over. Crawford's response came immediately. She doesn't want repayment. She wants you to win. There's a difference. March 3rd, 2026. The new apartment in Costa Mesa had 2 bedrooms, first and last month's rent covered by Margaret lease in Eli's name. Zora got her own room for the first time in her life. Moving day brought help from unexpected places. Ben Cole arrived with a truck. Jerome Washington came with his Navy buddies. Former Prestige Motors employees whose names Eli was still learning showed up because solidarity mattered more than convenience. They moved boxes in silence, punctuated by brief conversations. Men and women who understood that what happened to Eli could have happened to any of them had happened to some of them. Keisha Taylor arrived with groceries. Your daughter needs to eat while you're fighting this battle. She handed Eli bags containing cereal, milk, bread, sandwich materials. Real food, not the cheapest options, but what a growing child actually needed. I can't accept. Yes, you can. Keisha's voice was firm. You're fighting for 127 people. That's enough burden without adding pride to it. By mid-March, the witness list had solidified. 7 former employees willing to testify. Ben Cole's documentation, Marcus DeLuca's confession and wire transfer evidence, Dr. Sarah Mitchell's professional validation, Margaret Ashford's testimony about canceling her order after witnessing discrimination. Crawford compiled it into a case file that ran 237 pages. This is comprehensive. He spread documents across Margaret's conference table where they'd gathered for preparation. But comprehensive doesn't mean easy. Richard's lawyers will attack every witness, question every document, make this as painful as possible. When does the EEOC hearing happen? Scheduled for April 15th. Federal Building, downtown LA. 3-person panel. Full testimony. Crawford looked at Eli directly. This is where everything becomes public. Everything. Your finances, your marriage, Naomi's death, the years of struggle. Nothing stays private. Eli thought of Zora asking if they were rich now, of Naomi's voice teaching him that truth mattered more than comfort, of the 127 people whose stories deserved to be heard. I'm ready. But he wasn't. Nobody could be ready for what came next. April 1st brought Richard Whitmore's deposition transcript. Crawford delivered it personally, his expression grim. He claims Diana acted entirely on her own, that he had no knowledge of the discrimination, that the emails showing his approval were forged or misrepresented. Can he actually claim that? He can claim anything. The question is whether the panel believes him. Crawford pulled out highlighted sections. But he made mistakes. Look here, he claims he never approved specialist payments over $5,000. But corporate policy requires dual authorization for those amounts. His signature is on every wire transfer, so he's lying. Yes. But he's lying with lawyers who know how to make lies sound plausible. Crawford closed the file. The hearing will determine whose lies are more obvious. April 10th, 5 days before the hearing. Eli sat with Zora helping her with homework when his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Mr. Thorne. This is Gabrielle Morrison. I was employee number 3 in those files Ben gave you. I signed an NDA 3 years ago, but my lawyer says if there's a federal investigation, I can testify without penalty. Her voice shook. I need you to know what Diana did to you. She did to me, set me up with an impossible task, paid a specialist to lie, fired me for incompetence. I took the settlement because I had student loans and no prospects, but I'm ready now. Eli closed his eyes. How many others are there? Gabrielle was quiet for a moment. I've been talking to people. There are 4 of us with NDAs, all ready to break them if it helps. Crawford needs your contact information. I'll send it. Gabrielle paused. Thank you for going first, for being brave enough to fight when the rest of us were too scared. I'm not brave, I just didn't have a choice. You had a choice. You could have taken the money and walked away. Gabrielle's voice strengthened. You chose to fight. That's the definition of brave. After she hung up, Zora looked up from her math worksheet. Who was that daddy? Someone who's been waiting for permission to tell the truth. Zora considered this seriously. Like when you fixed the Ferrari. Like when I fixed the Ferrari. And like when you told the truth to your principal even though she didn't believe you. Zora's gap-toothed smile appeared. Machines don't lie, Daddy. People do, but people can change their minds. Yes, baby, sometimes they can. April 14th, the night before the hearing. Eli tucked Zora into her own bed in her own room, in an apartment he didn't have to share with her sleeping space. You nervous about tomorrow, Daddy? A little. Will the bad lady be there? Yes. What if she lies again? Then we'll have documents that prove she's lying. Truth doesn't need volume, baby. It just needs evidence. Zora was quiet for a moment. Mommy would be proud of you. The words hit harder than Eli expected. His voice caught. You think so? I know so. Because you're doing what she taught you. Listening to what's broken and fixing it. After Zora fell asleep, Eli sat in the living room with Naomi's engineering notebooks spread across the coffee table. Pages of equations and diagrams and teaching notes written in the careful hand of someone who knew she was running out of time. The last page contained a note dated 3 weeks before she died. Eli, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. But I need you to know something. The truth is bigger than fear. It's bigger than money. It's bigger than the people who try to bury it. And when you give it a chance to speak, it roars. Don't be afraid to let it roar, my love. The world needs to hear what you know. Eli traced her handwriting with his finger. Tomorrow in a federal building in downtown Los Angeles, he would let the truth roar. For Naomi. For Zora. For 127 people who'd been invisible too long. The truth was coming, and it would not whisper. April 15th, 2026. The federal building in downtown Los Angeles had been designed to intimidate marble columns, reaching toward ceilings that disappeared into shadow security checkpoints, staffed by officers whose expressions suggested they'd stopped caring about individual stories decades ago. The EEOC hearing room occupied the third floor, accessible only after metal detectors and ID verification, and the implicit understanding that justice lived behind locked doors, government standard fluorescent lighting, conference table scarred by years of depositions, American flag in the corner as if truth needed visual reminders of its obligations. Eli arrived at 8:30 for a 9 o'clock hearing. Crawford walked beside him carrying 2 bankers, boxes of evidence that represented 6 months of invisible observation, 3 months of frantic documentation, and testimonies from people who'd spent years believing silence was safer than speech. The gallery held 20 seats. Margaret Ashford occupied the front row, dressed in a navy suit that whispered wealth without shouting it. Dr. Sarah Mitchell sat beside her professional interest, overriding whatever research she'd abandoned to witness this. Ben Cole was there, pale but determined. Jerome Washington, Keisha Taylor, Gabrielle Morrison, Robert Sterling, the 4th NDA case who'd come forward last week, his settlement 3 years old but his anger still fresh. The faces of pattern discrimination ready to watch the system they'd been excluded from finally acknowledged their existence. Zora stayed with Mrs. Calloway. Eli had explained it gently. This was procedural business, adult complexity. Nothing a 7-year-old needed to see. The real reason sat unspoken. He didn't want her watching if the truth lost, didn't want her hope crushed by machinery that ground slowly enough to feel like defeat. Diana Whitmore entered at 8:50 with 2 lawyers flanking her like bodyguards. She'd lost weight since the showcase 3 months ago. The tailored suit that had projected authority now hung slightly loose, as if her power had been siphoned away along with her reputation. Dark circles beneath expertly applied makeup. Hair still perfect but somehow diminished. A woman watching everything she'd built collapse in slow motion. Her lawyers wore the expensive armor of corporate defense, Hugo Boss suits, leather briefcases, expressions suggesting they'd defended worse people for better money. But something was different. They weren't flanking Diana protectively. They kept distance, as if association itself had become liability. Diana didn't look at Eli, didn't acknowledge the gallery, just sat at her table and stared at documents her lawyers arranged with less confidence than their billable hours suggested they should possess. Richard Whitmore was conspicuously absent. The 3-member panel entered at precisely 9 a.m. Dr. Judith Morrison, 62. Black with silver hair and eyes that had witnessed every permutation of workplace discrimination and stopped being surprised without stopping being angry. She led the panel flanked by 2 colleagues whose credentials Crawford had researched: Daniel Foster, white male 50s, 20 years EEOC experience; Patricia Williams, black female 40s, former civil rights attorney now serving federal oversight. Dr. Morrison arranged papers on the table with movements that suggested this hearing was one of dozens she'd oversee this month, each representing someone's entire world compressed into procedural timelines. Mr. Thorne. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority tempered by human recognition. Mrs. Whitmore, thank you both for appearing. This is a preliminary fact-finding hearing to determine whether the complaint filed by Mr. Elijah Thorne warrants expanded investigation under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. She looked at the gallery, acknowledging the former employees whose presence spoke louder than words. We will hear opening statements, examine evidence, and render preliminary findings. This is not a trial. There are no criminal charges at this stage. We are determining whether probable cause exists to justify Department of Justice referral. She turned to Diana's lawyers. Counselors, you may begin. The lead attorney stood Sandra Winters, who'd deposed Eli with clinical precision, designed to make poverty sound like moral failure. Your Honors, this complaint represents fundamental mischaracterization of routine employment termination. Mr. Thorne was hired as detail specialist custodial work. He was terminated for performance issues, including unauthorized use of company time, disruption of client relations, and insubordination. She clicked a remote. PowerPoint presentation appeared on the screen, corporate polish applied to character assassination. Mr. Thorne lacks formal automotive certification. No college degree. Employment history showing pattern of short-term positions. The Ferrari incident he characterizes as discrimination was in fact an impromptu challenge Mrs. Whitmore extended to all showcase attendees. That Mr. Thorne interpreted this as racial targeting reflects his perception, not Mrs. Whitmore's intent. The slides changed. Eli's credit score. His arrest record from 19. Employment gaps presented as evidence of instability rather than systemic exclusion. Furthermore, Mr. Thorne refused a generous settlement, $85,000, far exceeding years of potential earnings. This suggests motivation beyond legitimate grievance. It suggests opportunism leveraging viral attention. Sandra sat. The presentation remained on screen. Eli's life, reduced to data points designed to make him seem desperate, unreliable, unworthy of belief. Dr. Morrison's expression hadn't changed. Mr. Crawford, your response. Crawford stood calm as deep water. May I present evidence, Your Honors? Please proceed. What followed was systematic destruction of every argument Sandra Winters had constructed. Crawford projected the email Eli had sent Diana 3 weeks before the showcase: complete diagnostic analysis, thermal imaging data repair procedure recommended with aerospace-level precision. Mrs. Whitmore received this analysis January 4th at 8:47 a.m. Red receipt confirms she opened it. She read it. She ignored it. Crawford paused, letting the timeline sink in. Then on January 21st, she sent this email to her personal account with Richard Whitmore copied. The problem resolution strategy email filled the screen. Subject line alone was damning. Contents were devastating. The Ferrari challenge outlined in precise detail, including which specialist had been contacted, what phrasing Diana would use, expected failure mode, termination procedure, post-failure. Dated 2 days before the showcase. This wasn't impromptu. This was premeditated humiliation documented by the perpetrator herself. Diana's lawyers exchanged glances. One whispered urgently to her. She shook her head, face pale. Crawford continued. And here is the wire transfer, $10,000. Corporate account to Marcus DeLuca, authorized by both Diana Whitmore and Richard Whitmore. 2 days before the showcase. Mr. DeLuca has provided sworn testimony that this payment was compensation for filing a false diagnostic report. A report blaming the ECU when he knew the actual problem was the bracket Mr. Thorne had correctly identified. The audio recording played Marcus DeLuca's confession, legally obtained time-stamped, his voice shaking. Mrs. Whitmore paid me $10,000 to write a false report. She knew Mr. Thorne's analysis was correct. She wanted him to fail publicly. The room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint traffic sounds filtering through triple-paned windows. But this isn't just about Mr. Thorne. Crawford clicked to the next slide. 4 other employees. All minorities. All subjected to identical challenges designed to justify termination. Keisha Taylor's face appeared, then Jerome Washington, Gabrielle Morrison, Robert Sterling. Each received impossible tasks. Each was set up to fail through specialist payments identical to Mr. DeLuca's. Each was terminated for incompetence that was manufactured, not actual. Crawford projected the pattern dates, challenges, outcomes, settlements, paid to buy silence. Mrs. Whitmore has implemented this strategy for 6 years. Challenge minority employees publicly. Ensure failure through sabotage or misinformation. Fire them. Pay them to stay quiet. Repeat. Ben Cole stood from the gallery without prompting. Your Honors, may I provide testimony? Dr. Morrison nodded. State your name and relationship to this proceeding. Benjamin Cole. I worked at Prestige Motors Elite for 5 years as service coordinator. I witnessed every incident Mr. Crawford described. I collected documentation because I knew it was wrong, but I lacked courage to speak until Mr. Thorne's case made silence impossible. He walked forward, handed a second USB drive to Crawford. This contains additional evidence I compiled after submitting the initial files. Email exchanges between Diana Whitmore and Richard Whitmore discussing problem employees and optimal resolution strategies. Financial records showing customer pricing varies by demographic. Crawford projected the data. Spreadsheets showing price variations by zip code. Minority neighborhoods charge 12% more for oil changes. Brake repairs, diagnostic work. The pattern was statistically undeniable, mathematically precise. This is institutional policy, not individual biases. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Mr. Cole, you said 5 years. Did management know about these pricing disparities? Diana approved them. Richard designed them. Ben's voice was steady now, confession bringing clarity. Corporate office tracked it in quarterly reports as market optimization strategy. They knew. They profited. They continued. Crawford moved to the next layer. Corporate memos appeared Richard Whitmore's directives about maintaining client comfort and brand alignment. Coded language that meant keeping minorities invisible, limiting advancement, ensuring they remained in positions where clients wouldn't see them. This isn't rogue discrimination. This is corporate policy implemented across multiple locations. Documents from 7 other Whitmore dealerships. Identical hiring disparities. Identical pricing strategies. Identical termination patterns spanning 12 locations, 7 years, 127 documented victims. Dr. Morrison and her colleagues were taking notes rapidly. Patricia Williams spoke. Mr. Crawford, you're alleging organized conspiracy across state lines. Yes. RICO implications. This exceeds EEOC jurisdiction. This requires Department of Justice criminal investigation. Diana's lawyers whispered frantically. Sandra Winters stood face flushed. Your Honors, these allegations are... Mrs. Whitmore. Dr. Morrison's voice cut through the objection. Do you wish to respond to these allegations? Diana stood slowly. Her lawyers grabbed her arm. She pulled away with force that suggested something breaking inside some internal dam, finally collapsing under accumulated pressure. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The room held its breath. I was following instructions. Diana's voice was barely audible. Richard told me we needed to maintain standards. He said certain employees created comfort issues for high net worth clients. He said the challenges were performance evaluations, that if people couldn't meet expectations, they didn't belong. Her hands trembled against the table. I believed him. Or I told myself I believed him. Because believing was easier than acknowledging what I was really doing. She looked at Eli for the first time since the hearing began. You were right about the Ferrari. I knew it the moment I read your email January 4th. I knew you were more competent than the specialists I'd hired, and that terrified me. Her voice cracked. Because if a janitor could outperform certified experts, what did that say about my judgment? What did that say about the entire system I'd built my career defending? Sandra Winters stood. Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly advise against. Diana cut her off. I'm done listening to lawyers tell me how to spin truth. The truth is, I destroyed people's careers because I was more afraid of being wrong than committed to being right. She turned to the panel. I discriminated against Mr. Thorne, against Keisha Taylor, Jerome Washington, Gabrielle Morrison, Robert Sterling, and everyone else in those files. I did it knowingly. I did it systematically. And I did it because Richard Whitmore rewarded me for it with bonuses, with praise, with the illusion of power that came from enforcing his policies. The room erupted, reporters in back rows typing frantically, former employees crying. Margaret Ashford's expression was grim satisfaction. Dr. Morrison banged her gavel. Order. The noise subsided. Diana sat heavily, her lawyers abandoning pretense of damage control, already calculating how to bill for a case they'd just lost. Dr. Morrison looked at Eli. Mr. Thorne, do you wish to add anything? Eli stood. The tremor from 3 months ago was gone. His voice was calm, measured dignity that didn't require volume. I'm not just a janitor, Mrs. Whitmore. I'm a father. I'm a widower. I'm a mechanic who learned from the best teacher I'll ever have. I'm a man who spent $4,200 on diagnostic equipment because excellence matters more than recognition. He pulled out receipts, spread them on the table. 3 years of saving. 3 years of sacrifice documented in credit card statements and equipment invoices. I have more expertise than your 5 specialists combined. You knew it. You buried it. Because accepting my competence meant confronting the lie your career was built on, that credentials guarantee worth, that people without degrees belong in margins. Eli's hands were steady. You did mean it. For 6 years to 127 people, you meant every humiliation, every impossible challenge, every termination designed to protect your comfort at the cost of other people's dignity. He looked at the panel. Machines don't lie, Mrs. Whitmore. They tell you exactly what's broken if you're willing to listen. Documents don't lie either. Neither do patterns. Neither do 127 voices finally speaking after years of enforced silence. Dr. Morrison conferred quietly with her colleagues. 3 minutes of whispered conversation, while the room waited, suspended between vindication and deferral. She spoke, "This hearing is concluded. We find probable cause supporting Mr. Thorne's complaint. Furthermore, the scope and systematic nature of evidence presented suggest violations exceeding EEOC jurisdiction." She looked directly at Eli. "These findings will be referred to the Department of Justice for criminal investigation under RICO statutes, wire fraud provisions, and Title 42 United States Code Section 1983, deprivation of rights under color of law." Diana's face crumbled. Her lawyers sat frozen. "Mrs. Whitmore. Mr. Richard Whitmore should expect federal subpoenas within 30 days. This panel recommends Whitmore Automotive Group operations be placed under consent decree pending investigation." Dr. Morrison stood. "This institution was founded on the principle that all people deserve equal treatment under law. For 7 years, that principle was violated systematically, deliberately, profitably. Today, we begin restoration. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel fell. Justice began. April 16th, 2026. Midnight. Diana Whitmore's termination arrived via email, Richard's lawyers working overtime to establish distance. No severance, no acknowledgement of 10 years marriage or 6 years implementing his policies. Clinical notification employment ended, corporate access revoked. 6 a.m. brought divorce papers served by process server, paid extra to ensure Diana was awake when she received them. Richard claiming fraud, that Diana had deceived him about discriminatory practices, that he'd been victim rather than architect. 9 a.m. her assets froze by federal court order. Prosecutors moving faster than expected, securing evidence before destruction. Bank accounts. Investment portfolios. The Newport Beach house, Richard's lawyers argued, belonged to him through prenuptial protection. By noon, Diana Whitmore was effectively homeless. Media coverage was relentless. CNN split-screened Diana's confession versus Richard's denial. MSNBC brought employment law experts explaining following orders hadn't been valid defense since Nuremberg. The video hit 25 million views. April 17th brought the first dealership closure. Prestige Motors Elite shuttered with terse statement about restructuring during transition. 40 employees laid off, inventory liquidated at 20 cents on dollar. Eli watched from the Costa Mesa apartment, Zora beside him, working on homework about honesty, while national news dissected consequences of lies. "Your teacher wants to know if I've ever told truth when it was hard." Zora looked up from her worksheet. "Have you?" "Yes, baby, the hardest thing I've ever done." "Was it worth it?" "Ask me in 3 years. October 2027. 18 months after the EEOC hearing. The Department of Justice announcement came via press conference, 347 pages of findings. 7 years systematic discrimination. RICO violations, wire fraud, civil rights deprivation under color of law. Richard Whitmore indicted on 14 federal counts. Diana Whitmore, cooperating witness, received immunity in exchange for testimony. The remaining Whitmore dealerships, 6 of original 12 still operating, placed under federal consent decree requiring 7 years mandatory monitoring. Settlement fund established $3.2 million. 127 victims receiving compensation determined by independent arbitrator reviewing documented damages. Eli's share was $85,000, exact amount Richard had offered to buy his silence 18 months earlier. The irony noted by every news outlet covering the story. But money mattered less than what accompanied it. March 2028. The California State Assembly voted 67-13 to pass Assembly Bill 2847, officially titled the Thorn Act. The law prohibited employment challenges based on protected class status, mandated reporting of discriminatory pricing practices, created whistleblower protections for employees reporting workplace discrimination, imposed penalties severe enough that compliance became cheaper than violation. Governor signed it on Sacramento Capitol steps. Eli and Zora, 9 years old now, missing both front teeth but smiling anyway, stood beside him for photographs. The cameras captured her hand in his as politicians explained how one man's courage had changed an industry. Opportunities multiplied. UCLA formalized the research assistant position, $30 per hour, 20 hours weekly, full tuition benefits for graduate school in mechanical engineering. Margaret's consulting arrangement became official, $750 hourly, 20 hours monthly minimum. The math was staggering. UCLA $2,400 monthly, Margaret's facility $15,000, public speaking $5,000 to $10,000 monthly. Eli went from $12 in his account to stability that felt unreal. He kept the Costa Mesa apartment, drove the Honda until transmission finally failed, replaced it with modest Toyota. Put Zora in better school, but not best school, because comfort differed from excess, and he'd learned from watching Richard Whitmore that excess corrupted. The Ferrari remained in Margaret's garage, driven once to UCLA to show engineering students what expertise looked like when it refused invisibility once to Keisha Taylor's house, to let her sit behind the wheel and remember competence mattered more than credentials. The rest of the time it was symbol. Evidence truth could win. Proof machines didn't lie, and neither should people. April 2029. 3 years and 2 months after Diana Whitmore dropped Ferrari keys as trap. The morning arrived clear Los Angeles spring at its most forgiving. Eli woke at 5:30. Old habits died hard. But this time Zora was already awake, too excited to sleep. "Today's the big day, Daddy. Today's the big day, baby." They drove to Watts in the Toyota, the Ferrari transported separately by Margaret's team for display purposes. The Zora Eleanor Memorial Automotive Training Center gleamed in morning light, 25,000 square feet, funded by Margaret's wealth community donations and surprising contribution from Richard Whitmore's bankruptcy settlement, $400,000 designated specifically for training next generation. Whether genuine remorse or strategic image rehabilitation didn't matter. Money taught skills either way. 200 people filled the lobby by 9 a.m. News crews, former victims, industry executives whose companies had implemented Thorn Act compliance, politicians who'd voted for reforms they barely understood but couldn't afford to oppose. 30 students sat front rows. 15, Black, 8 white, 4, Latino, 3, Asian, diversity that came from removing barriers rather than enforcing quotas. Each selected through blind skill assessments, hands-on competence, evaluated without knowing names, faces, backgrounds. Each had full scholarships, funded by the Settlement Margaret's Foundation, and community support that had grown organically once people understood what was possible. Tyler Harris stood at front of classroom, visible through glass walls. 19 years old, Black from Bakersfield, originally teaching diagnostic methodology to students who would have been excluded 3 years ago. His journey mirrored Eli's talent, ignored until someone decided to look past assumptions. 10 a.m. Eli stood behind the podium where Part 1 had opened the scene, now arriving with full context. Margaret Ashford sat front row, Dr. Sarah Mitchell beside her, Ben Cole, Jerome Washington, Keisha Taylor, Gabrielle Morrison, Robert Sterling. Crawford in back, professional satisfaction evident. Mrs. Calloway in honored guest section, crying already because Rosa would have been so proud. And Zora, 10 years old now, all baby teeth gone adult smile, confident and bright. Wearing dress Mrs. Calloway had helped her pick hair and braids Eli had finally mastered after 3 years' practice. The Ferrari occupied the lobby mounted on platform bronze plaque polished, the car that changed everything. But it wasn't alone. Beside it sat diagnostic equipment donated by Ferrari North America, Mercedes-Benz BMW. Tools worth $200,000 available to students who couldn't afford 4,200 of their own. Eli looked at the crowd. Prepared remarks sat on podium. He set them aside. 3 years ago, I was invisible. Words came without notes, without performance. I mopped floors in showroom where my competence was buried because it came in wrong package. I was janitor who knew more than certified specialists, black man who understood machines better than people paid to fix them. Father trying to show his daughter that talent mattered more than credentials. He gestured toward Zora. Today, 30 students will never be invisible. They'll have tools, training, proof that expertise can be learned if someone's willing to teach that skin color has nothing to do with understanding how machines speak. Applause. Eli waited for silence. This car behind me changed my life. Not because I own it, though I do legally, because Diana Whitmore made promise she regretted, but couldn't revoke. It changed my life because it proved truth is louder than lies when you give it microphone. He looked at the Ferrari, remembering showroom challenge 50 witnesses watching trap close on person who designed it. My wife Naomi taught me machines don't lie. They tell you exactly what's broken if you're quiet enough to hear. Emotion cracked his voice. She was right, but she taught me something else that people can change. Not quickly, not easily, but possible. Movement at back. Woman in AutoZone vest over civilian clothes watching with expression equal parts pain and hope. Diana. She'd sent $500 donation 2 months ago. Anonymous but return address gave her away. Eli hadn't responded, hadn't acknowledged. But donation-funded textbooks for 3 students who couldn't afford them. Their eyes met across crowded room. Diana nodded once, apology, acknowledgement, recognition that some damage couldn't be undone, only accounted for. Then she slipped out, returning to whatever life she'd built from ruins. Eli continued. 127 people were affected by systematic discrimination at Whitmore Automotive Group. Each received compensation. Each received acknowledgement. But money doesn't erase years of humiliation. Justice doesn't undo damage. It just stops bleeding and gives wounds chance to heal. He gestured to students. These 30 represent something bigger than individual success. They represent system that finally asked whether talent was being buried by assumptions. They represent industry that decided credentials matter less than competence. They represent possibility that America can actually become what it claims to be, place where merit speaks louder than prejudice. Thunderous applause. Tyler Harris and students joined. Cameras captured everything, Ferrari student Zora beaming with pride. When noise subsided, Zora stood. Can I say something, Daddy? Eli nodded, throat too tight. She walked to podium, stood on step stool to reach microphone. Voice, clear. Confident girl who'd learned truth was worth speaking even when people didn't want to hear. My dad says machines don't lie. But he taught me people can change. 3 years ago, someone tried to humiliate him because they couldn't see past what he looked like. Today, 30 kids get to learn from him because he refused to be invisible. She looked at Eli with Naomi's eyes. Mommy would be proud, Daddy, because you didn't just fix a car. You fixed a system that was broken way worse than any engine. Room erupted. Eli pulled Zora into hug that became photo every outlet used father and daughter. Victory and legacy proof, sometimes fighting for justice meant fighting for right of next generation to never need to fight at all. After ceremony, after speeches and photos and congratulations from people Eli would never remember, he and Zora drove to Laguna Beach. The Ferrari emerged from Margaret's garage for final journey, not to prove competence, not demonstrate victory. Just spend time with his daughter in car that represented everything they'd survived. Zora ran hands over leather interior. Can we come here every year? Where? This beach, where Mommy asked you to marry her. Eli pulled into parking spot overlooking Pacific. Ocean stretched endlessly, waves catching afternoon light horizon dissolving into silver. He'd proposed to Naomi here in 2011, this beach, this spot. Sunset turning sky orange and gold. She'd said yes before he finished asking, laughing with joy of someone who knew exactly what she wanted. 18 years ago. Lifetime and yesterday simultaneously. We can come every year, he looked at Zora. Every year until you're tired of it. I'll never be tired of it. They walked to sand shoes abandoned in car feet, finding cold shock of ocean water. Zora ran ahead collecting shells with focused intensity she applied to everything. Tyler Harris had asked to join them, 19-year-old, who'd driven 6 hours from Bakersfield on grandmother's insistence that Elijah Thorne could teach him things no school would. Now he walked beside Eli, heading to Ferrari factory engineering program in Italy on fellowship that wouldn't have existed without Thorne Act. You changed my life. Tyler's voice carried weight of debt that couldn't be repaid. I was working at Jiffy Lube changing oil, dying inside, because I knew I could do more, but nobody would let me try. You changed your own life. I just gave you tools. No. You gave me permission to believe my talent mattered. Tyler paused. That's bigger than tools. Silence. 3 generations mechanical expertise spanning from Eleanor's Honda Civic to Naomi's Boeing systems to Ferrari proving competence transcended credentials. Zora returned with shells, presenting them like treasures. Are these the same ones Mommy saw? Some of them. Ocean brings new shells every day, but some have been here longer than we've been alive. How do you know which are old and which are new? You don't. You just appreciate them all the same. Sun began descent toward horizon, painting sky in shades without names. Eli thought of Naomi's voice. Truth is bigger than fear, bigger than money, bigger than people who try to bury it. When you give it a chance to speak, it roars. She'd been right. Truth had roared. 127 voices heard after years in forced silence. Industry forced to examine assumptions business models were built on. 30 students given opportunities that wouldn't have existed without someone refusing to stay invisible. Zora looked up. What's next, Daddy? Question she'd asked 3 years ago in different context when homelessness threatened and justice seemed distant. Now, with stability and vindication achieved, question carried different weight. We've changed our corner of the world, baby. Now we help others change theirs. How? By teaching. By showing people talent exists everywhere if you're willing to look. By making sure next kid like Tyler doesn't have to wait until 19 to find someone who believes them. Zora nodded seriously, bigger than the sky. Eli smiled catchphrase that had sustained them finally arriving at conclusion. Bigger than the sky. Waves rolled in eternal and patient. Ferrari sat in parking lot, symbol of victory that didn't need driving to matter. Tyler stood beside them, future secured by present sacrifice. And somewhere in space between memory and hope, Naomi's voice whispered that machines don't lie. That truth finds volume when given permission, that sometimes fixing one problem creates blueprints for fixing thousands more. Sun touched horizon. Sky blazed orange and gold and purple. Zora's hand found Eli's small fingers gripping tight. They'd changed their corner of the world, and the world slowly, relentlessly, beautifully had changed them back.